today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be focusing upon the United Nations conferences on climate change and some other really interesting international activities. My guest today is an expert on these topics. Felix Dodds is an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina, an associate fellow at the Telus Institute, Boston, and a City of Bonn International Ambassador. Felix chaired the UN conference in 2011, which came forward with the first set of Sustainable Development Goals, and he was a candidate in 2019 to head the UN Environment Program. His latest book, he co-edited, for the Friends of Governance for Sustainable Development, came out last week, and it's titled Governance for Sustainable Development, Volume 8, SDG 16 and its interlinkages with other SDGs. Felix recently attended the preparatory meeting for the COP29 in Bonn, and before that, the United Nations COP28 conference in Dubai, and the previous two COPs to that in Egypt and the UK. Felix Dodds, you're a busy man. Welcome to today's Global Connections program.
It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, Bill. So happy to do it again.
Well, thank you. Let's get this COP stuff out of the way. I think we're doing Cops and Robbers, COPs, Conference of Parties. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, we'll get that out of the way. We'll just call it COP in the future. Well, wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the upcoming conference.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about what are the main goals of the conference? What do they want to accomplish?
That's a very good question. And so there are ongoing issues that may or may not be resolved, but the main issue for COP29 is that they have to replace what's known as the new collective quantifiable climate finance goal. For the people who are listening, Hillary Clinton in 2009 at the Copenhagen conference advocated, and the Paris Agreement underscored this, that by 2020, developed countries should provide 100 billion a year to help developing countries address climate change. We didn't reach that by 2020. We did by 2022 get a little bit more than that. It was 116 billion nearly. And so they have to make a decision. What would be the annual amount of money that we need to help developing countries to move forward? And I can give you a few points on what the present negotiations are, but I think considering the amount of climate-related disasters we've seen recently in the last couple of years, you can imagine that the amount of money needed to address these is larger than 116 billion.
And why is it, many people say, well, why should we help these other countries? What are some good reasons for us helping? There are many good reasons, but what do you say when people say that?
Well, I mean, there's a principle that's actually in, I think, US law, which is the principle of the polluter pays principle, and that, you know, most of the damage that we're seeing at the moment is due to greenhouse gases that are being emitted predominantly from developed countries. India and China are now contributing to that, but the historical contribution has been through what we've done. So we've caused the damage, and so in principle we should in some way pay for dealing with the damage. But the implications of it, of course, are enormous, because we're seeing climate refugees as one of the big issues for the future, the impacts on health as different weather patterns bring different health challenges to different countries. Food and water will become critical issues as your weather patterns change, what you can grow in certain places change, and the issue around, you know, lack of water in particular countries will just expand over the coming years.
Exactly. And we, the developed countries, economically developed, are the biggest polluters on the planet. We caused 99% of the problem in all probability, and Haiti or Burkina Faso or the islands in the Western Pacific did not create the climate problems by leaving large climate footprints. or carbon footprints, I should say. One term we hear bandied around is loss and damage. What exactly is that?
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. But I mean, yeah, the conversation at the moment on what should replace the 100 billion, you have a US position that sees the 100 billion as a floor to build from. So they're saying we shouldn't give less, but if you add inflation into the figure from when Hillary Clinton suggested it in 2009, you're looking at more like 142 billion anyway. But you have some developing countries, the small island states, the Arab group, China and India, looking at more like 1.1 to 1.3 trillion needed a year. Now, not all of that will come from public funds, but it will be a larger proportion than at the moment people think is possible. Loss and damage is an interesting thing. It's where you can really show the link between what climate change has impacted on, and that those countries have seen a financial loss and an impact of damage. We've seen that often in the Caribbean, where the hurricanes come in and they impact on the coastal zones of those islands. And so it's been argued since I guess about 2005 or six, that there should be a fund to help address that and to build better resilience. And so at the Egyptian COP, which was in 22, there was an agreement that such a fund should be set up. And in fact, the fund was established on the first day of the Dubai COP last year, and they set up a board which will be in charge of the recommendations on financial disbursement. And so I think we don't know how that's going to go. I mean, it's had its first two meetings. There was about nearly 700 million promised at the Dubai COP last year. Azerbaijan is pushing for new commitments in a recent note that they sent out. But I think, the important thing for this is that that money is moved forward as quick as possible to any disasters that happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, the president of Azerbaijan is chairing the conference. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean you have it's more the minister who's the president of the COP, but I mean ultimately the COP is opened by the head of state of that country, and while they were not expected to be the country chosen by the last COP to host it, they have done a pretty good job of preparations already. So they literally have a meeting in 2 weeks' time, and maybe less than 2 weeks' time, in Azerbaijan to try with the heads of delegation to try and move forward on the quantified goal. Now, this is only one of the issues that the COP has to deal with, but it will be judged how successful the COP is based on this particular thing that was its mandate to actually secure. Just like for Dubai, they had to come out with a stock taking.
What does what does Azerbaijan? Apparently, there are a lot of goals. What people would like to see achieved during this conference. What does the president of Azerbaijan or the conference as a whole want to achieve that's solid, that's quantifiable, is something that people can sign on to, the countries can sign on to, and we can measure it a year or 2, 3 years down the road to see how well they're doing?
Well, the goal on finance is clearly one of them. They've also indicated that one of the other areas that they want to address is a thing called Article 6, which really deals, it's Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and it recognizes that parties are going to try and deal with carbon trading. And it's been controversial over different COPs, but they are putting a lot of political weight to see if that can be sorted out. There was hope that it would be sorted out, and Dubai it wasn't. But it deals with things like how are credits authorized? How can you show that a particular offset is only being counted by one country or one company, if it depending on which of the Article 6 it relates to. And the fundamental divide is between countries that are seeking more restrictive rules to the market, ones where they can kind of be more clear that these things are happening, and those that and which would then generate more real world emission reductions, and those that would prefer a kind of carbon trading with less oversight. And clearly, if you want to have a real impact, the oversight is quite an important aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, even though we're trying to move away from fossil fuels, we really need to put the pedal to the metal on this, because it seems we're running out of time as far as climate change and the climate crisis. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're dealing with this broad and very important, really imminent issue of the climate crisis, and what the United Nations conferences, some of them have done in the past, and what they hope to accomplish in the future. And my guest today is Felix Dodds. Felix has been involved with what they call the COPs, the Conference of Parties, for many years now. Felix, you in the intro, I said you've been involved, and you certainly have. Do you feel that there's more of an urgency today amongst the countries where, it's no longer the calendar's running out, the clock is ticking? It seems like, as we see the seas rise, the glaciers are melting, water shortages all over the world, and where we don't have water shortages, we're having flooding. So do you see that the countries are getting more concerned about this issue? I think you're muted. Felix, you're muted. There we go. Now we got it.
So I think it's a mixed bag. And so you have these moments when you can move forward. And so the Loss and Damage Fund is a classic example of that. The global stock take last year, where we talked about a transition from fossil fuels, was also an important stepping stone in the direction, and a decision that they want to see something like a tripling of the renewable energy by 2030. So, the political directions are being given. It's up to individual countries to then pick those messages up and to act on them. And so, for example, a way of putting some, I guess, political leadership is that the previous presidency, the United Arab Emirates, the present presidency, Azerbaijan, and the next one, Brazil, have announced that they will, by the COP, come out with their next set of national determined contributions. So we talk about the issue for COP29 being the new qualified goal on finance. The issue for COP30, Brazil, will be on the issue of what are the new determined contributions, the national determined contributions. And so those three countries are going to come out with their next version of that to try and show leadership. And countries are meant to submit their what we call NDCs by the 10th of February of 2025. So we're not far away from that, less than a year. So the pressure of this COP must be to get countries to look at that global stock take, see where we are in the context of, I think at the moment, the projections by the carbon tracker is if the present commitments are delivered, we'll still see an increase in temperature of 2.7 degrees centigrade. So we have a lot to do.
We certainly do, no doubt about it. And as I mentioned, you've certainly been involved in this. As you look back over the years, I know you didn't go to all the conferences, but the United Nations, due to the visionary commitments of so many secretaries general and other players at the UN, not by themselves, but in conjunction with other people, if it had not been for these decisions to focus on this problem, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today, would we? As far as this struggle to get off of fossil fuels, to convert to clean energy, to retool our cities to make them more sustainable. But the UN has played a critical role in this, has it not?
It has. And I think, the run up to Rio Plus 20 in 2012, one of the two themes for that was the green economy. And what we saw in the recovery packages from the financial crisis was countries putting anywhere between 20 and 70% of the funds for the recovery package into green technologies. And that's why a lot of those green technologies are now, viable against traditional uses, though you have always countervailing forces. I mean, we just saw the announcement this week of an African energy bank set up by the petrochemical industry to look at expanding fossil fuel kind of exploration in Africa. So, we have to be aware that even if the science is on our side, even if there's more political weight, then those people who have been benefiting from fossil fuel will still try and fight us all the way.
Exactly. And many of the poorer countries are saying, well, you developed countries use fossil fuels for eons, and here you've polluted the environment, and now it's our turn to at least try to improve our lives. And this is one of the few energy supplies that we have that may be affordable, but we have to work on this together. Well, Felix, before we run out of time, I do want to hit on two more topics very quickly. One is your book that came out on Governance for Sustainable Development, Volume 8. Very briefly, what's the thrust of that?
So the High-Level Political Forum, that is the body each year that looks at the or reviews progression to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, identifies a number of those goals that it will look at a particular year. And this year, one of those goals was governance, which is the SDG 16 goal. And the way we worked to produce the book was the government of Romania hosted a workshop. UNDP were the main UN agency supporting us, and we looked at how SDG 16 interlinked with other goals, like with the poverty goal or with the hunger goal or with the climate goal, because the SDGs are not just about the goals themselves, not sectors, but also about how do you address the interlinkages. And that book takes you through some of those presentations that were made on those issues.
Mm-hmm. And you referenced the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. These were goals that will run from basically 2016 to 2030 as far as 15-year span. And they were adopted in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly, 17 of them, to eradicate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to empower women and girls, to do a variety of other things, especially combat climate change. But if our viewers would like, they can Google Sustainable Development Goals, or they can go to www.un.org to get more information on.
Or they could buy my book called Negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals, and that
there
would give
you
them
go.
the whole story.
That's perfect. Felix, ever since the United Nations was formed in 1945, males have been the secretaries general of the United Nations. And there's considerable discussion now of having a female as the next secretary general. And Antonio Guterres is position as Secretary General, I think, expires at the end of 2025, and will be replaced in 2026. But they're already talking about potential candidates. How do you perceive this situation with having a female as basically the CEO of the United Nations?
Yeah, I mean, there was a hope last time that it was going to be a female, and we all thought it would be a female from Eastern Europe because it was Eastern Europe's turn to be Secretary General. But the deal between Russia and a number of countries meant that a European took that place. This time, the expectation is it would be a candidate from Latin America and the Caribbean, and they have a lot of very good female candidates. I did a set of 7 articles for Interpress Service on who those might be. And I think that the important thing to consider is that the Secretary General plays a particular role. You can have, depending on the political position of the world at the time, they'll choose a person who will be more of a secretary than a general, or if they want someone who wants to lead more, then it'll be a general. We're not in a very good political position at the moment because of what's happening in the Middle East and in Europe, but just more generally, and we may have in America a non-progressive president for the next 4 years, and so that will be really problematic. So there are some very good what I call general candidates, ones who would lead for Secretary General, people like Mia Mottley from Barbados or Alicia Bárcena, the Foreign Minister of Mexico. But it's more likely, I think, that they will go for someone who is more likely to administer what the member states say and not try and take them in a direction.
And the Secretary General is powerful with a bully pulpit, but is not, as to dispel so many of the myths that are circulating, have been from the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan and different groups like that. The Secretary General and the UN's not undermining U.S. sovereignty. It's not trying to be a one world government to run the world. It doesn't have an unlimited budget. It doesn't have black helicopters that are waiting to swoop in and take over the capitals of various countries, especially the United States. Those are all myths. It's all nonsense. But the Secretary General still plays a very critical role in helping to coordinate and to make the United Nations system more effective and more efficient. And that system impacts people all around the world through a variety of services, like helping to move aircraft, ships, mail, and weather information.
Well, Ebola, just think of Ebola and of COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
The health things.
Right. But the Secretary General of the UN and the UN are vital. So we need to learn more about these particular entities, and we will be talking about them. And Felix will have to get you back to talk about an update on the COP29 and also your new book that's coming out in March or so of next year, or no, a little later in the year. But anyway, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.